Good evening, everyone. My name's Shane McElroy, and welcome to everyone joining us on our Dairy Focus Live webinar this evening. We've great content for you this evening, where we'll cover off herd health management topics, including vaccines and parasite control, and we'll cover off as well the importance of dry cow minerals for the herd during the dry period in preparation for calving and lactation. This is the second of our Dairy Focus Live webinars for the autumn, and I'm sure you'll all be very familiar with the technical updates provided by our Dairy Focus Vodcast every week. And tonight you'll have an opportunity to ask questions from our technical team on all things nutrition and animal health. We have a great lineup of speakers for our session this evening with our resident vet, Joris and nutritionist, Willie Darmody. We'll also hear from one of our dairy farmers in the joint Future Farmers programme with Teagasc. Shay Ryan is milking 160 cows in New Ross, County Wexford, and I know everyone will get a lot of valuable information and practical tips from Shay as to how he manages the herd over the winter months. So the format of the webinar this evening is to have two short presentations from Joris and Willie, and then contributions from Shay as to how he manages his herd in Wexford. This will be followed by a Q&A session, question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. And we'd encourage everyone on the call this evening to submit your questions, and we'll endeavour to go through those, as many of those as we can, in the Q&A session later on. So the webinar this evening will be recorded and will be available afterwards on the Glanbia Connect website and on our YouTube channel. And just to call out, you can subscribe to the Glanbia Connect YouTube channel to receive the regular Dairy Focus podcast. And we'll run this evening until about 8:15 with Q&A towards the end. So we'll kick that off from about 8 o'clock this evening after we've two presenters. And you can put your questions then to our speakers via the YouTube chat if you're logged in on YouTube, and on text message as well to 087 147 8161. So a little bit later in the webinar, Willie Darmody, our resident nutritionist, will take us through the importance of dry cow minerals for the herd to ensure that they're on track for calving and early lactation, and the importance of those for the health of the herd. But our first topic, Joris Summers, our vet, will bring us through how to interpret bulk milk disease screening results for the herd and the use of vaccinations or parasite treatments to get in control of these various diseases where they're present in the herd. So just as a reminder, I'd like you to become part of the conversation this evening by sending in your questions on the YouTube chat or on 087 147 8161. So over to you, Joris.
Thank you, Shane, and good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us again this week. So in this week, what I would like to cover off, as Shane said, was the infectious diseases that really play a part in the dairy herds and the opportunity that we may have at controlling them this time of year. And this time of year where a lot of cows are being dried off and all the cows are being housed and the young stock is being housed, there are certain diseases that are a greater risk, but there are also a number of diseases for which the animals are no longer at risk of contracting them. And then I'm mostly talking about parasites, obviously, stomach worms or lungworm. It's unlikely they will actually pick up those diseases during the housing. Whereas other respiratory diseases, such as IBR, for example, most animals are actually at a greater risk of picking up those diseases during the housing period. And that's something that you need to consider when you're designing your herd health management. Now, the dry period is obviously strongly focused on mastitis control, and that's what everybody is very much focused on right now, is choosing the right antibiotic, drying off the cows properly to make sure that you're controlling the mastitis in your herd and the cows are set up for a successful next lactation. But the dry period also provides an opportunity to use products that could otherwise not be used in lactating cows to control parasites, for example, and we'll certainly come back to that again when we talk to Shay Ryan. When it comes to the vaccines that can be used, the dry period is also a suitable time to be vaccinating cows against a lot of the diseases that they might be exposed to. The benefit is twofold, really. One is that you are protecting the cow herself against that disease, and for most vaccines, you actually protect her for the next 12 months. But also what is happening during the dry period is that you, for a lot of the vaccines, are boosting the antibody levels that the cow is contributing to the colostrum that will be fed to the calves. So when the colostrum management is good in your herd, you're actually passing on a higher level of these protective immunoglobulins or antibodies onto the calf, to the baby calf, that from when it's born, it has a better protection against those diseases if those diseases are circulating in your herd. Now, how do you know if those diseases are circulating in your herd? That requires some form of a screening. And for young stock, for example, a very popular type of screening is doing fecal egg count testing to see if they have been exposed to parasites during the grazing season. Another method of screening could be doing a young stock screen on a blood sample, which would require you to have the vet to take blood samples from 10 or 12 heifers in your young stock group and check which diseases they may or may not have been exposed to. For our dairy cows, we have a very straightforward system, and it's using a bulk tank milk sample to screen the herd for certain diseases. And Glanbia has been running a herd disease screening service on bulk tank samples for many years at this stage. And we have some really good coverage over the entire Glanbia catchment area, with a very high proportion of our suppliers actually availing of that service. And it's that service that we will delve into a bit more with Shay Ryan, as it provides vital information, not just the latest reading, but actually when you look back over the last 12 months, what are the diseases impacting the herd and what can you do about it now? So let's go to a conversation I had with Shay earlier on this.
Shay, you've been doing the bulk tank disease screening with Glanbia for a couple of years. And could you give us a little bit of insight as to how you use that information that you get every so often on making decisions on the herd health?
Yeah, I suppose I'm doing it maybe 7, 8 years now. I suppose the most important thing you have to look at is the vaccine usage and the dosing pattern.
How does that lead to the decision around drying off and dosing the animals during housing? What is the decision there then?
The decision there, all the first calvers will get a fluke dose, but any mature cows will just get a stomach worm dose, and hopefully target stomach worms more than fluke.
Yeah, very good. And would you have given the cows any stomach worm doses during the year?
Yeah, nearly every year. This is the first year we gave them one dose around the start of June. Most years would have got either an injection start of June and maybe a pour on for late August. Some of this, but this year only gave them one dose in start of June.
Tell us, what diseases are you vaccinating against that are in that screen? So you have IBR, is that one you're vaccinating against?
Yes, IBR twice a year.
Twice a year. And then lepto?
Lepto, yes.
And salmonella?
Salmonella, yes.
Yes.
Also used Rovac Corona.
Very good, very good. So on the bulk tank screening, we can see that you have a high positive reading this year for BVD, and we went back and looked at the last 2 years and it was actually much lower. So do we have any idea of where this might have come from?
This is the first year I'm running a closed herd. So whether it's from cattle I brought in or my own stock was in close contact with other cattle, I'm not so sure. I was vaccinated for BVD up to 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, but we never got a positive case of BVD, so I stopped vaccinating for that.
And are you aware of anybody in the neighborhood that might have?
Yes, there might be a giant farm with a case or two of BVD. So we'll look at it. We'll look at it again later on, and if needs be, we'll start vaccinating for BVD again.
And if we look at the young stock dosing during the year, Shay, from a stomach worm point of view, what's your protocol there? Let's say, this spring now, the spring coming, what's your plan at the moment on how to approach that?
Basically, we're on a pretty dry farm and we'll try to get calves out possibly mid-April, and basically 6 weeks after calves gone out, if they're them build up some immunity to worms, we wouldn't dose them till at least 6 to 8 weeks after letting them out. And then basically during the year, we dose 3 times. First time with white drench, second time yellow drench, and then a third time with clear drench. And that's kind of the way we've been using it the last few years.
Yeah. And you haven't done any fecal testing on the calves?
No, I didn't do this year. I meant to do some this year, but things have been a bit difficult around here.
Yes, absolutely. But it's part of the plan, isn't it?
It is part of the plan next year to do fecal testing for any dosing takes place.
And is there any particular vaccines that you use on the calves? Anything like blackleg?
No, there's never been blackleg used here, but the calves IBR, they've been all done for IBR and for pneumonia.
Now, Joris, very good information there from Shay in terms of his use of diagnostics and herd disease screening, particularly from the bulk tank sample to understand diseases in his herd. He's using a number of vaccines there. He's using Salmonella, Lepto, IBR, and also rotavirus then as well. There's a lot of talk about vaccines at the minute, Joris, in the human population around coronavirus, and we're all waiting for that vaccine to come and bring its immunity to us to protect us from that disease. But I think that's really showing up the value of vaccines, and how they have been very valuable for a long time in herds to control those diseases.
Absolutely, and it plays an important role in controlling diseases, whether the disease is already in the herd and the vaccine is used to actually contain it within maybe carrier cows, which is something that happens for a disease like IBR, for example, or whether a vaccine is being used to protect the new generation of animals coming into the herd that are considered naive to a disease, so that they don't pick up the disease, they don't get sick, but they also don't become the next generation of carrier animals that can then spread it to other herds or other animals within the same herd. So absolutely, that there's huge value in using vaccines, as we all now know. COVID hopefully will provide that value, or the COVID vaccine will provide that value for us as well. And from a bulk tank reading point of view, one of the things that comes out with the vaccination status is obviously important to take that into account when you're interpreting the results of the screen, because they do obviously affect the reading of the bulk tank levels.
Yeah, and I noticed you had Shay's herd disease screening results up on the screen, and we've got that system in place now where the results are interpreted effectively to identify what the result means and what the actions that should be taken. But just to take one of the diseases in particular there, Salmonella, Joris, can be very catastrophic for that to go through the herd, especially at this time of the year with cows heavy and calf.
Yeah, I mean, any herd that has gone through a Salmonella outbreak knows the devastation that causes. You lose heavily pregnant cows potentially. You will lose the pregnancy quite well developed well after the breeding season. So those cows, even if the cows don't become sick and have to leave the herd, they usually don't have a chance to actually remain a productive cow in the herd, because they've gone past the breeding season and are now just an empty cow. And so it's not just the loss of a pregnancy, it's the loss of the potential calf and the cow. And the vaccine that is there, that is available, is actually very good in preventing that sort of a situation happening on farm.
Yeah. And just then to the other category of treatments that we have, again, excellent that we have them available to us, the anthelmintics, to control either fluke or worms as needed at this time of the year. Great time to clear them out. Just Joris, there's a lot of talk about antibiotic resistance, but we know now that there's a significant amount of anthelmintic resistance right across the country as well. Just take us through that if you would.
Yeah, so up until recently, there was actually very little evidence or no evidence of anthelmintic resistance in Ireland. And it was one of the reasons why Ireland was the only country in the EU where anthelmintic products were sold over the counter. But in recent years, we have seen an increase in herds reporting resistance against anthelmintic. So basically, the wormers that we have are not being as effective as they used to be. And that is the definition of resistance. you will still see some effect, but not what you're expecting. And so there are very little advances in developing new anthelmintic products internationally, not just in Europe or in Ireland, but internationally. So we're sort of stuck with the products that we have. And all dairy farmers know there are a very limited number of options of product you can use in a lactating cow. Mm-hmm. There genuinely is one product you can actually use without having to worry about withholding the milk. And if we want to be able to use those products in 5 years or in 10 years' time, we really have to be more cautious and more responsible on how we use those products, and using something like the herd disease screening to actually plan what products you're going to use and when is part of that. And the way Shay has decided this year to no longer dose his adult cows for fluke, because he's had a consistently negative reading in the bulk tank, not just over the last 24 or 12 months, but over the last 24 or 36 months, he has been negative. So in effect, his herd is actually clear of liver fluke. The exposure is no longer there. So there's no need to be dosing those cows now during the winter for liver fluke. And he can focus entirely on using a product for stomach worms, which he knows is present in his herd.
Yeah, no, really important there that farmers can identify which treatments are needed. And look, we can see with the anthelmintic resistance piece, we're moving in the wrong direction. And in a grass-based system like we are in either beef or dairy, it's so important where we're going to get, when we're grazing, we're going to get worms, and we need to have products that will be able to control those. With vaccines, you can go in and prevent and stop them getting the disease. With parasites, they'll always get the disease. We treat them afterwards, but we need those treatments to work. So that's a really key piece. I think that Shay has identified that he doesn't need to treat for fluke, and that he can, keep that fluke treatment for another time when it may come back and it'll still be working on his farm. So that's a key piece. Just Joris, in terms of the service and the vaccination status, we ask farmers to submit their vaccination status because it's important when we or they are interpreting the results, and even which tests to use. Tell us just a bit about that if you can.
Yeah, so for most of the diseases that we screen for that you can vaccinate against, so salmonella, lepto, and BVD, if the herd is vaccinated, they will show up with a positive reading. But because we know the herd is being vaccinated, the interpretation of those results means that vaccination is controlling the disease within the herd and is providing a protective level of cover in the herd, in the cows that have been vaccinated. For IBR specifically, we can actually tell the difference between cows that were exposed to the actual virus and cows that have an immune response to the vaccine, because it is the immune response that we read in the milk. And whether that one was mounted against an actual infection or whether that was mounted against the vaccine is quite important for IBR, because you want to know, do I actually have carrier cows in the herd, or is my bulk tank just positive because I am always vaccinating the herd? So in Shay's example, for example, he had forgotten to update us on his IBR status. So we have to change the records now for him, because his reading is always high, but we don't know if that is because he actually has IBR in the herd or whether it's because he vaccinates every 6 months. In his next round of testing, once his vaccination status is updated, we actually use a different test, and that one looks specifically for any trace of the virus having had an effect in the herd. And therefore we'll be able to tell him very specifically, your cows are free of IBR, but the vaccine is having them covered and protected, or actually keep vaccinating because you do have carrier cows in the herd and you don't want them to start causing issues again.
Yeah, exactly, Joris. And just before we move across to Willie, just a quick mention of a disease that we can't actually vaccinate for, Joris, and we do screen for, but still can be controlled all the same, and that's Neospora. And just maybe give a comment on the number of positive herds we get, because it seems to be quite prevalent. But then how can this be managed, Joris?
Yeah, you've touched on a good area there, Shane. We do see an increase in Neospora over the years. We see more herds becoming positive for Neospora, at least at some stage during the year. Positive animals are more likely to be detected when they're near the end of their lactation or very early after calving. But it is something that actually herd or cows become more positive, if you will, for Neospora at the end of a pregnancy or near the end of a pregnancy. So that's why the reading now, for example, in November has a lot more positive herds than the reading back in July or June, for example. The way to control Neospora, and as you pointed out, there's no vaccine, there's no treatment for Neospora. So it's all about keeping it contained again within the animal that has it, and that she can't pass it on to the next generation. And that really comes down to breeding policy within the herd. But you need to identify the positive cows first. You need to know which one or ones in the herd are the positive cows. And once you have them identified, you can decide what to do. If it's a single cow in the herd, which can be enough to turn a bulk tank positive, if it's a single cow in the herd, it might be as simple as removing that cow from the herd or just not breeding her and letting her get out the herd on a natural way. But if you have more cows affected, obviously that's not a financial or economical option. And then it's about making sure that you're not breeding replacement stock out of those animals, because in many cases, Neospora positive cows will abort. But if they don't, they actually pass it on to their offspring. And if that offspring is a replacement heifer that you're hoping to keep, she will then have Neospora and could abort during her first pregnancy, or also pass it on to her daughter. And that way, Neospora actually stays in the herd. So if you have identified your positive cows and you feel, there's too many of them to actually say, let's cull it out of the herd, then make sure you breed those positive cows to beef straws or to a beef bull. There's nothing wrong with the calves. There's nothing wrong with the milk out of those cows. The cows are perfectly healthy as long as they remain in calf. You actually won't notice any difference. But to get it out of the herd, you can't be keeping their replacement stock of those cows.
Oh, really good, Joris. And look, we'll come back to, we've got some questions coming in already on animal health, and vaccinations and parasite control as well. So just as a reminder to people, text in your questions to 087 147 8161, or you can type it in on the YouTube chat if you're logged in on YouTube. So just we'll move over now to Willie, who will take us through the importance of dry cow minerals through the dry period in terms of improving the animal's health to get them ready for calving and for early lactation. So over to you, Willie.
Thank you, Shane. Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to talk through the importance of dry cow minerals, how to manage dry cows, and we'll also have a word with Shay Ryan later on this evening as well. So I'll start off then. Minerals play a very, very important role in animal performance, animal immunity, animal health. The dry period represents a critical time to increase the reserves and to get in that copper, selenium, iodine, cobalt, manganese, and build up those reserves so as the cow calves down in a positive frame as regards minerals come early lactation. Irish forages are deficient in minerals and trace elements. Every field can be different. Every farm is certainly different. Soil types vary enormously in Ireland. We go from free draining soils to heavy soils to peaty soils, and each of those soils has its own characteristics. So it's important to determine what your mineral status is. It's important to analyze herbage. It's important to get your blood tested as well every so often, just to determine if you've got an issue there. As regards the issues that we come across, selenium can be deficient, copper can be deficient, and occasionally we come across some phosphorus deficiencies as well. But those are the key ones, and particularly copper is the key one because it's antagonized by a number of elements. High potassium affects copper, high molybdenum affects copper, high sulfur affects copper. So if you can get the copper right, generally you'll solve a lot of things in the background there as well. And plus the fact that copper is very, very key for immunity. It's involved in a lot of pathways, and particularly fertility, milk yield, big aspect to herd health as well. As regards the dry period, it is important to get those cows on minerals very, very quickly. It's important to get that 6 weeks minimum for dry cow mineral supplementation. Every day that the cow is not getting minerals is a day that her reserves are being reduced. So that's why it's critical to get in that 120 grams per cow per day, sprinkle it on the silage, get it in twice per day, and then we know that if every cow is eating silage, then every cow is also getting dry cow minerals as well. As regards Irish forages can be high in potassium. Now, potassium can be problematic. Potassium can create and can cause milk fever. So that's why we like to load up cows with magnesium during the dry period. We like to keep dry cow diets low in calcium. If you don't, you run a greater risk of milk fever after calving, because the cow is unable to draw calcium from her tissues and from her skeleton if she got calcium during the dry period. Milk fever is a big cost. The average case of milk fever can cost up to €312 per cow. Milk fever is a gateway disease. It causes other issues. It affects fertility. It affects milk yield for the full year. It's a disease that's easily prevented. I mean, there are plenty of farms that run into no milk fever, as against our farms that run into milk fever for a number of reasons, but particularly if there's a high level of potassium in the forages. Retained afterbirths can be prevented as well. Retained afterbirth cost over €400 per cow. Again, selenium, very, very important. Vitamin E, very, very important. Zinc is a critical product as well, for immunity, for hooft, for hair, and don't forget the vitamins. Vitamin A, D, and E. Vitamin E, very, very important one. Works very, very closely with selenium. So if selenium is deficient, you've got to look at the vitamin E, get them both in there, get them both in at a high level, and you'll have easier calvings, you'll have stronger calves, you'll have cows that'll get up quickly after calving, you'll have better quality colostrum, and it all has a further knock on down the road. You know, it's all about fertility. I mean, it's effectively when you come to the month of May, that cow's fertility has been determined by what happened 3 months earlier. So if you've got the earlier 3 months wrong, well then the breeding season is going to be quite difficult overall. So those are some of the key things. And now we'll have a word with Shay Ryan on how Shay manages his dry cows and how he feeds his dry cow minerals.
We started drying off cows. The first calvers were dried off at the start of November, and subsequently we dried off basically 16 cows a week since then, and hopefully we'll finish up tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and when is your first cow to calf, or your first heifer to calf then?
Next year we're calving a little bit earlier, as we used fixed time AI. So we're due to start calving around maybe 18th to the 20th of January, which would be normally a week or week and a half earlier than normal. The cows are in all time now since the 4th of November. So they're all got silage, all ad-lib silage, and dry cows were getting say poor quality silage for a few days.
What's that silage like? What's the quality of that?
The winter silage here, we're still on bales for the minute. The bales are 73 DMD. I know it's a little bit high, but they're on ad-lib silage with dust and minerals on top.
Grand. And they're and as a grouping, like what's body condition like? I know you'll always have different cows and different groupings and so forth, but as a rule of thumb.
As a rule of thumb, I'd say 3.5. They're in good condition now this year, so I'd be happy enough with the condition. The cows here are getting 120 grams of dry cow mineral per head per day. Basically, there's enough feed space here for the cows, so room is not an issue.
Yeah, and they have plenty of room to express themselves and plenty of room to walk around and just to express their natural behaviour and their normal social order.
They are. There's always room. There's always enough room here. I know you'd probably always like more room, but they do have adequate room to walk around. And
just in terms of, the soil type you're on, what sort of soil type you're on there?
The farm here would be a pretty dry farm. 90% of the farm would be pretty dry. It would be a free draining soils. Some of the land is a little bit heavier, but in comparison to the rest of the country, we'd be very lucky down here. I'm farming here 10 years home now, and at the very start we did we suffered a lot with a low phosphorus deficiency. Index here was maybe 1. So the soil was low in phosphorus, the silage was low in phosphorus, actually milk was low in phosphorus, so had to feed a lot of P minerals to get cows back.
No issues with copper or selenium or zinc or any of those type of things?
No, the trace elements here are pretty good. There is slight deficiency in iodine, which would put iodine in the water pre-calving. The in-calf heifers here were housed on the 10th to the 15th of November. They were in a separate space, which are being trained through the parlour at the moment for up until around mid-December. They'll be trained in the parlour, then they'll be mixed with the rest of the herd.
They're getting the same Dracon minerals, they're getting ad-lib silage.
In-calf heifers are getting ad-lib silage, in-calf or pre-calf minerals, and they're getting 2 kg at the moment in the parlour per head per day.
Yeah, and say just cows are coming up close to calving, say the cows are sort of they're springing up at this stage now and maybe a week or 10 days away. How do you normally manage those cows? Are they separated out, or when do they move into the calving area?
They'll be normally pulled out maybe a week to 10 days before due to calf, and then as the season goes on, it's, you know, things get busy and it's probably down to 2 and 3 days, but you try your best to take out anything up on the point of calf, and you know, well in advance if you could, if you had.
Yeah, a bit of space. Yeah.
The cows on the point of calf with the straw bed and same diet, same everything. So just keep everything simple, and it's very labour intensive, and a lot of machines going for long periods of the day to feed cows, which it just complicates the system. And I think this year I'm really after seeing that the simpler the system, the easier it is for everybody, cows and man.
Willie, great info there from Shay. He's got an awful lot of things in control with the feeding of the cows and with the minerals there as well. He mentioned just, Willie, that he was using iodine in the water, and he's proven a deficiency there on his farm. But is that something that all farmers need to do, or is it more farm specific? And I'm just thinking, you know, from the point of view of iodine levels in milk as well, and you know, that being a challenge where they have been too high for infant formula from some farms in the past. But just to comment on the iodine deficiency risk across all herds.
Yeah, it's very farm specific, Shane, and very, very unique. The percentage of people feeding iodine through water during the dry period is very, very, very small. And I think it's just something historic with Shane there overall. So, you know, if people are feeding a good Dracon mineral, properly formulated, feeding it at 120 grams a day, fed twice per day, they're getting adequate levels of minerals more often than not. And it's important that if people think they have an iodine deficiency, they need to get it diagnosed. I mean, they need to get the herbage checked, they need to get the bloods checked, and take it from there. What people are inclined to forget is that the symptoms of iodine toxicity are the same as iodine deficiency. So you can run wrong very, very quickly. So it's important to get it analyzed and get it diagnosed before you do anything.
And it's one of those things, Willie, you'll only have to do it once every 5 or 10 years even, because you're on your same land, so you identify it as being an issue. And likewise, if you identify it as not an issue, then you don't need to take action. So it's every farm's different, isn't it? In terms of a lot of talk about organic trace elements versus inorganic trace elements, you might take us through that, just the differences in Dracon minerals and trace element content.
Yeah, inorganic are products like copper sulfate, sodium selenite. They're the raw form, so to speak. While the organic form is the protected form. So for example, Bioplex copper, Bioplex zinc, Bioplex manganese. They're all organic minerals. They're readily available. They're more bioactive and readily absorbed by the animal as against the inorganic type form. The organic forms are 4 to 5 times more available than the inorganic forms. So, for example, in any good mineral, you're going to find Celplex, which is protected selenium. You're going to find protected copper in the form of Bioplex copper. You're going to find some protected zinc, and you're going to find some protected manganese as well. And they are the products that work. If you're trying to prevent a selenium deficiency or You know, if you run into some cases of retained afterbirths, really you've got to go down the Celplex route. You've got to go down the protected organic route.
Yeah, yeah. Willie, you mentioned just the cost of one or two of the diseases there, but I suppose maybe that sounds very high for some farmers listening. You know, the cost of milk fever being over €300 and so on. But I suppose if you take, you know, not every case of milk fever survives, and if we lose an animal, you know, and maybe lose the calf as well, you know, we're in bother. So take us through just a couple of those costs of health cleansings and milk fever.
Yeah, and I suppose milk fever is a key one, because I mean there's some herds are badly affected by milk fever, and it's a gateway disease, so it has a bigger impact longer term. I mean, it does reduce milk yields longer term in the lactation. It reduces milk solids. It reduces fertility. Cows that get milk fever, they're slower to cycle. Their conception rate is reduced, and they're slower to go back and calve. So UCD has done loads and loads of work on it, and the figure that the UCD guys threw out is €312 per cow. And when you think of the milk that's lost and the hardship and the work and the extra concern that's involved when a cow goes down with milk fever, I mean, it's certainly heading towards that cost.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just Willie, just take us through the use of boluses for trace elements, and maybe even just the difference in minerals and trace elements and the vitamins. You know, the precarver mineral covers all, but trace elements boluses are only covering trace elements, isn't it?
Yeah, just bear in mind the size of a bolus, you know, and in terms of what goes into a bolus, then it's going to be the trace elements. And even at that, some boluses don't have the full range of trace elements. You might get copper and selenium and iodine, but you may not get cobalt, zinc, or manganese, and so you get variations within the bolus term. Also, you don't get magnesium. And magnesium is critical. You know, that cow needs to get in 30-40 grams a day of magnesium. So you're not getting that from the bolus. You're not getting phosphorus from the bolus. And again, phosphorus is very important to prevent milk fever, very important to keep those reserves built up. And also you don't get any vitamins. I mean, you don't get vitamin A, you don't get vitamin D, you don't get vitamin E. And again, vitamin D is very, very important to prevent milk fever. And vitamin E is absolutely critical for immunity, reducing somatic cell counts, healthy calves, muscle tone. You know, so the bolus will provide maybe a basal level of minerals, but quite a low basal level of minerals. You know, like think of the amount of minerals you're getting when you put in 120 grams a day versus what a bolus contributes on a daily basis. So certainly it's hard to beat the dust mineral.
Yeah, it's the only way. And look, there are farms then that may need to top up with some particular trace elements and maybe use a bolus as well, and that's fair enough. But I think the trace element, the Dracon mineral is the base feeding. Just in terms of the practicalities of feeding it, you mentioned it twice a day, and I know there's even some people using it 3 times a day, all down to headspace and how much headspace is available, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose as herds have expanded, it has become an issue with some herds. And essentially, if you're tight on feed space, animals cannot be left without silage. You know, there has to be silage there 24 hours a day, so to speak. And you've got to put on that mineral twice a day, if not even 3 times a day, because some animals will eat silage in the morning, more will eat it in the afternoon, more will eat it at night time. So you have to top the minerals up. You have to keep the minerals there. Also, some farmers might put in some buckets or some blocks in the background as a fallback or a fail-safe, or they might use some boluses in that situation as well. Which you have to put in the minerals at least twice per day where you're tight on feed space. No,
that's great, Willie. Lots of questions coming in, and maybe we'll move on to our Q&A session. We've got lots of questions coming in from different parts of the country. But one thing I forgot to say is if you can put in your name if you wish, but particularly your county as well, just to get a sense of where everyone is texting in from this evening. Joris, a question that's come in for you there. First off, a farmer who has negative fluke readings for his cow herd from his herd disease screening, and he's not going to treat them, and that's the right thing to do, as we were saying earlier. But does he still need to dose the young stock for fluke?
That is it's a very good question, but it's a very farm specific scenario. And it depends on the type of land that the young stock is grazing. Are they grazing the same land as the cows, the exact same paddocks as the cows? Then you can assume that they have seen a similar level of exposure as the cows, which in this case might be 0 or at least very low levels. But if the calves are grazing different land, an out farm, or maybe slightly wetter land, or if the calves are set stocked on a single area and never move away from that for the whole grazing season, then ideally you would actually test a dung sample for these calves specifically for fluke. And now is an ideal time to test dung samples for fluke, because a lot of fluke will have reached the mature stage of its life and would be shedding eggs. So if there is any evidence of eggs in the dung from this group of young stock, that's a clear sign that fluke is there. The absence of eggs in a dung sample doesn't necessarily mean that there is no fluke, but if there is any egg present, then that clearly shows that the calves will have been affected.
Another one for you, Joris, just while we're on the wormers as such. Pat in Meath has asked about how does he know if there's any wormer resistance on his farm, or to fluke or worms?
Yeah, it's a question that I think we all ask ourselves. It's not my farm. I don't have the issue on my farm. It's the neighbors that have the wormer resistance. The easiest way really to test that, Pat, is if you have a dung sample taken from your young stock and it shows that they are over what would be a reading of 200 to be really positive and indicating that these calves need treatment because they are being affected, their performance is being impacted by the level of worm burden. You go and treat them, and then 2 weeks later, for example, around 2 weeks, you take a dung sample again, and what you want to see in a herd where the product is still fully effective is that the reading that you get after treatment has to be only at most 5% of the reading that you got before treatment. So you want to see a 95% reduction in the result you get between the two dung samples. Now, if that's not possible to do the two dung samples, you could potentially just do the one after treatment. So 10 days, 2 weeks after treatment, you take a dung sample. The problem with that is you don't know if the calves needed treating in the first place because there wasn't a reading. But if there still is a high reading 2 weeks after dosing, that's a clear sign that the dosing didn't work.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a fairly simple way. I know there's a bit of labor in it, but at the same time, if we're going to use these treatments, we expect them to work. We want them to work. We need our animals to be cured, and if they're not working, we need to change the product and take note that there's resistance in the herd, and that's something that we need to get around, because animal impacts in terms of growth rates and milk production will be there if we're not on top of it. Willie, a couple of questions in from Michael in Cork. These two questions: should my in-calf heifers be on the same mineral as the cows, and are mineral licks as good as powdered minerals?
Yeah, absolutely. The in-calf heifers mean they're young cows, so they need to be on the same dry cow program, dry cow mineral as the more mature animals. As regards the licks are fine, but you've got to bear in mind that intakes can be inconsistent. Some cows love them, some cows don't. Again, they're fine as a backup, but I think it's again the dust mineral is the mineral to rely on.
And we have two questions as well from Jack in Wicklow for you, Willie. When is the right time to start using precarver minerals? And Jack boluses all the cows and the in-calf heifers with a particular bolus. I'll not mention the name of the bolus, but at drying off, would he need to use as much dry cow minerals? He doesn't do any deficiencies in the forage or in the soils.
Yeah, the right time to start using the precarver mineral is as soon as you have a dry cow group together. That dry cow grouping needs to go on a dry cow mineral, and they need to remain on that mineral for 6-7 weeks, however long they're going to be dry. They need to remain on that dry cow mineral. As regards the bolus, it's important to determine what level are the boluses supplying, and then it's also important to determine the animal's status for the relevant minerals as well, and then make that decision. That's a very specific one as well. The level within the animal needs to be determined, and then the additional level of supplementation, if required, needs to be based on the level that's already in the animal plus what the bolus is contributing. But there's a bit of homework on that one. So determine what the bolus is supplying, determine what the animal is in the animal already, and then subtract one from the other, and then go from there.
Yeah. We have a question for you, Joris, from James in Wexford. He's vaccinating for IBR every 6 months, but his bulk milk reading is fluctuating through the year between positive and negative. He's sometimes positive, sometimes negative. And he's wondering, is the vaccine not working, or is it working okay?
Okay. So that's one we come across quite often, actually. A herd that is vaccinating very well for IBR and sticks to the program, and they will see the bulk tank reading dipping in and out, positive, negative throughout the year. Now, some of that could be a fluctuation because of milk yield and extra dilution throughout the year. But what's really at play here is that in this herd, a small proportion of the cows actually have been exposed to the virus in the past, and they might potentially still carry it. And those are the ones that, depending on their milk yield or whether or not they're dried off, they are contributing to the tank, and they will make the bulk tank positive. When those cows are not contributing significantly or not at all, the bulk tank will become negative again. And it's the vaccine that is actually preventing those cows from spreading the IBR to the rest of the animals in the herd. So in most cases, they will be your older cows, and in time they will leave the herd. And we've seen it quite a lot that in herds over time, IBR just disappears because it goes with the older cows. But it could be, and it sometimes happens, where the herds were negative and all of a sudden they become a low positive level, and it was actually young heifers or replacement heifers that were exposed ages ago already, nearly in their life, and now they become lactating cows and they start contributing. But that's a less common situation.
Sort of linked question, but on BVD instead. This texter hasn't sent their name but or location, but they're vaccinating for BVD since day one, and they've had no outbreak and they've had no PIs. Is there any reason to continue vaccinating, is the question.
That's again a very farm management specific question. Any vaccine is really like an insurance policy, and we all probably feel that we're overpaying on car insurance, but when we do need it, we're very happy that we have it. On BVD, with the BVD eradication program that has been running for a good few years now, we've reduced the frequency of the prevalence of BVD in the country to very, very low levels. So the risk of BVD causing issues has become very low. So in most herds, you might be in a situation that you could leave out the BVD vaccine, but it really depends on the biosecurity of your herd. How closed is your herd? Are you buying in stock? Is that stock all tested individually? So have they all had their ear tags tissue tested? So they have to have been born in the last 8 years. But also neighbouring herds. Is there contact with neighbouring herds? Are you using contract rearing? Or are you buying in replacement heifers? All of those elements come into play when you want to decide to leave out any of the vaccines. But BVD specifically, the risk in general has become very low. But you need to make that decision for your own herd and list off where you might be exposed to BVD and how risky it would be.
Very good, Joris. Yeah, no, that's bang on. Willie, question in from PJ in Mullingar. He's tested silage and he's tested soils, and he's high in molybdenum, and he wants to know what does he need to do extra to counteract that, and he's asking about protected minerals, and will that do a better job?
Yeah, molybdenum is a problem, particularly with copper. Molybdenum is a copper antagonist, so it knocks out copper, and as we discussed earlier, I mean, it knocks out the inorganic form of copper, so it knocks out the copper sulfate. And that's where the Bioplex organic mineral comes into play. It's essential that the mineral that's fed with a high molybdenum sample has a high level of organic Bioplex copper. But it's a case of just putting in a bit more copper just to cover that off, you know, and that's what the Bioplex Organic Farm does.
Yeah, yeah. And the question in from Pat in County Louth: are my replacement heifers, the 1-year-olds, getting enough mineral in via the meal? So he doesn't say how much meal he's feeding, but it's mineralized meal, obviously. Are they getting enough? The 1-year-olds?
Yeah. On average, if they're getting 2 kilograms of concentrate, I mean they're getting a decent level of minerals. Now again, if that's a problem farmer, if there's some deficiency in the background, or maybe there's a selenium deficiency or a zinc deficiency, then that has to be determined, and then make a decision from there. But on average, if you're feeding 2 kilos of a heifer feed, you're getting plenty of minerals.
Yeah, yeah, very good. And a farmer hasn't given his name either, but I tested my silage and it's high in potassium. How does he manage that?
Yeah, that potassium is troublesome. Even in the year that's in it now, I've seen some samples with over 4% potassium, which is sky high. Generally, if you're sort of around 2.5%, you have some chance. Again, you really got to throw magnesium at this situation. Just think of it in the spring. You know, you can run into grass tetany at grass, and you're grazing pastures that are very high in potassium or potash, and you go harder on the magnesium. So the options here are to, if that silage is high quality material, then it may have to be restricted. You might have to reduce the intake, maybe pull it back 1 kilo or 2 dry matter, put in 1 kilo or 2 of straw in there. So straight away you're reducing the potassium load on the cows. But you're going to have to go over the 30 grams of magnesium a day. You may have to go to 40, and with those very, very high potash silages where you're getting up to 4 or 4.5, you may even have to go closer to 50 grams of magnesium a day. So then you're feeding a Dracon mineral with a phosphorus level, with a magnesium level of 26-28%. And you may have to go with some magnesium oxide as well. You may have to feed some sweetened CalMag on the silage for the last fortnight before calving. But those high potassium silages are very problematic now.
Yeah. Joris, a question coming in from Kieran, and I know Kieran's in Cavan. He messaged us on our last webinar as well. I forgot to vaccinate my cows for IBR for the second time this year. So he's done them once, but not the second time. Should I do it straight away or wait until the springtime?
Yeah, so in the herds where IBR is given twice a year, in 99% of the herds, we're talking about the live vaccine. And the live vaccine is actually very good in that it only requires 1 shot. So yes, Kieran has run late. So for a short while, his cows have been exposed more than they should have been. They haven't been covered by the vaccine. But if he was to go in now, the cover will be there again very, very shortly. And that's the beauty of the IBR live vaccine. And it will cover them again for 6 months.
Yeah. And Joris, a very linked question in from James Butler there from TIP, who's asked about the use of RSV and PI3 vaccine, or is IBR alone enough?
Okay. So RSV and PI3 and IBR, all 3 are respiratory viruses. But the vaccines obviously they're very specific, the vaccines. So the IBR vaccine doesn't do anything for RSV and PI3, and the other way around as well. Now, in general, most cows, adult cows, will have seen RSV and PI3 as baby calves, built up their own immunity, and they are probably strong enough to fight off any recurring infections of RSV and PI3 that come into the herd. Now, obviously, if cows are under pressure nutrition-wise or around calving, when their immunity might drop a little bit, and their immune system just isn't as strong as it normally would be, it can hit them and it can overwhelm them. So a vaccine would boost the immune system. But to compare it with what we're currently experiencing, everybody is asked to get the flu shot. But the flu shot does nothing for the COVID. You need to get the second vaccine specifically for COVID. But what does happen is that the flu vaccine will protect you in getting the flu, and therefore you will be better able to fight off any other infections that you get. So by vaccinating cows for IBR, you're not directly protecting them against RSV and PI3, but you are making their airways, their lungs, their windpipe better at fighting off an infection such as RSV or PI3 to come in.
Another one, just when we're on the respiratories, there is a question, Joris, from Barry in Kilkenny. His last 2 summers, the cows have been coughing a lot. Obviously not a winter issue, but it's a summer issue. You just asked the question. So last 2 summers, cows have been coughing a lot. Never had lungworm issues in the past. Is there a test to check for lungworm before the coughing starts, or do you just treat when you get it?
Yeah, it's a very common occurrence, especially the last 2 years. We've seen a lot more herds showing coughing cows in the summer. In the past, we would have always said lungworm is not really an issue for adult cows. It's a young stock issue. Adult cows might get what is called reinfection syndrome, but their immune system is well enough suited to stop it and don't let it progress to the next stage of a lungworm infection, basically, and call it to a halt. But in the last 2 years, we've seen that actually lungworm is able to progress to the next stage and really affect adult cows that we would have always assumed have the right immune system status to fight it off. How that needs to be dealt with is really as soon as coughing starts. And it's the time of year that no other respiratory diseases really will be the primary cause in general. So it's that sort of June, July, August time when conditions are nice and warm, but also a bit humid, that lungworm really thrives. If coughing starts, then assume that it's lungworm and treat animals that are coughing. You have to treat animals that are sick. Sadly enough, any test that we can do, be it on a dung sample or be it on milk, won't show any results that are positive before cows start coughing. The best way to test is actually what's called a lung wash. It's a lavage of the airways, which your vet would have to do. And what they try and attempt is wash out some of the larvae that are crawling up and down the windpipe of these cows, which is making them cough. And once they get washed out, you have a clear diagnosis that this is lungworm. But the larvae that are causing the coughing don't make a dung sample or a milk sample turn positive yet.
Willie, a question for Ian from Peter in Waterford, and another linked question as well. But I had issues on farm at Cavan last spring. He had fed a dry cow mineral, but still there were problems. Didn't say what the problems were now, but what could be the issue? And that's from Peter in Waterford. And then just a related question is, I've needed to use CalMag in the last week before Cavan over the past few years. Is this okay? Is it a sign that something's not working?
Yeah, I suppose the CalMag thing, it's a reflection of potassium intake. And where you're getting those high potassium silages, I mean, you just have to go that little bit harder with magnesium. And, you're increasing the magnesium intake from 30 grams a day up to maybe 40 to 50 grams a day with the extra CalMag or magnesium oxide. As regards the dry cow minerals and maybe having some problems as well, I suppose, again, it's a program. You really got to get in there early, get them on those dry cow minerals for 6 weeks. Make sure you don't have some shy feeders that are maybe not getting enough minerals. Just ensure that they're getting a mineral twice a day. And I think it's good management practice to get some bloods taken in the back end of the year and get your grass silage analyzed for minerals. If there is an underlying deficiency there, at least you identify it early, and then you can put a preventative program in place. Also, problems, you can have some subclinical milk fever. Maybe there's a slight touch of milk fever. Maybe cows are that little bit slower to calf. Maybe the calf isn't coming out as quick as it should, or the cow isn't getting up as quick as it should. And there could be some subclinical milk fever there as well. And again, I suppose just get in there and get the bloods analysed, get the herbage analysed, and draw up a program after that. Especially when there's been a previous issue, Willie, isn't it? That there's guys that trouble last year. Let's get in early this year and make sure it's not the same problem this spring. And you mentioned with the subclinical milk fever, and we can even get in the past when I was called out to cases of calves
dying at a young age, very often it can be from a hard calving because the cow's just a bit low in calcium. Maybe didn't have a full-on milk fever, but she was down in calcium, too slow calf, and maybe didn't get up, calf didn't get sucked, and leads to a very different problem, but there's actually a calcium issue in the first place.
Keep an eye on the whole body condition element of it as well. Shay Ryan puts big emphasis on body condition. I mean, cows need to calf fit. Like cows that are over conditioned, they will be slower to calf. They will have more difficult calvings. Again, cows that are under conditioned, that are too thin, I mean, they're going to be weaker by nature, and they're going to get very, very thin after calving. So cow body condition score and mineral supplementation are probably the two key elements to starting the foundation for the next lactation.
Yeah. And Joris, the last two questions are to yourself, and they're actually both from County Carlow. Philip in County Carlow is asking about is cows are dosed for fluke every winter because he has positive readings, and then the first reading when he tests again in March shows up positive. Does that mean he has resistance in the herd? That's from Philip in Carlow.
Yeah, good question. So the bulk tank reading is very good at flagging exposure to a parasite or to an infectious disease in general. Very good because it reads the immune response. But what happens when the immune system runs into a disease or when an animal gets infected by a parasite? The immune system will mount a response and will basically stay on high alert for weeks or months, or in some diseases, years. And with parasites like liver fluke or stomach worms, it actually takes a few months for the immune system to settle down again, even if all the stomach worms or all the liver fluke have been cleared from the system. So that could be if you're doing a right treatment for liver fluke at the start of winter, and you're clearing out all the different life stages of liver fluke. So we're talking about the adults and the immature fluke are cleared out of the cows. Then it will still take a few months before the immune system no longer shows a response in milk. Now, what could also be going on is that maybe you're not clearing out all the adult and immature liver fluke from the system. It really depends on the product that you're using. There are very specific products that will do, they contain triclobendazole. They will clear out all life stages of fluke, but they're the only group of products that do that.
And a longer milk withhold on those, or
there is
dry period needed, yeah.
Absolutely, a longer milk withhold. So some people might run into trouble with a short dry period if the calving dates are coming close. But all the other products that are used for fluke dosing only clear out the adult fluke. So if they're only being used once, maybe during the winter, then obviously whatever was there as immature fluke on the day gets a chance to mature, and that might still cause a positive reading in the bulk tank in the spring as well. So there could be two causes for reading to be positive. And you really have to go back to, well, what product am I using? And am I actually clearing out the entire fluke population out of my cows?
Yeah, what product's been used and how often it's been used, isn't it? You can go twice with the lesser product or once with triclobendazole.
Exactly. Yeah.
And last question is from Ronan and Carlo. Fairly straightforward one. Is there an issue with giving dry cows any of the vaccines during the winter? Obviously, they're heavy in calf. Yours, any problem with putting them through the crush and giving them the vaccines?
Yeah, I think if you leave it and, not too late, so let's say you stay at least 2-3 weeks the calving date, there's really no issue with giving vaccines to pregnant cows. And from a timing point of view, it's absolutely fine. Your vaccine for the likes of lepto or salmonella can absolutely be given in December or January because they will last for 12 months and they will give the cows protection for the full 12 months. So if it suits your management better, labor-wise, to do those vaccines during the winter, absolutely don't wait with your lepto until March or April when you have the busy calving time, start of grazing, maybe the start of breeding coming up. With it forward. Bring it in the quieter winter time and do lepto then. The same vanilla.
Exactly, and as well as the farmer being busy, the cow's very busy at that time, producing a lot of milk, trying to go back and calf and all the rest of it. So it's a quiet time for everyone, cow and all, in the winter, isn't it? Joris and Willie, thank you very much for answering those questions. It was a bit of a rapid fire round there for about a half an hour, so great work. Just guys, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the webinar this evening and for your participation and for your great questions. if there was any questions we didn't get to, we'll respond to you individually, and one of our technical team will be in touch. Joris or Willie will be in touch. As we know, every farm is different, and for the bespoke solutions for your own farm scenario, get in touch with your local Glanbia representative. There's loads of technical information as well on the Glanbia website, on our weekly easing and our Dairy Focus Vodcast. And just a reminder to subscribe to the Glanbia Connect YouTube channel, where you'll receive the Dairy Focus Vodcast updates and all our videos there as well. Hope everybody has got something useful out of this evening's webinar, and we'll have further Dairy Focus live webinars in the near future. So to finish up our webinar this evening, thanks to everyone for joining and for participating and for your questions, to our speakers and to Shay Ryan, particularly our open source Future Farmer, in conjunction with Chagas there as well. So folks, stay safe on farm and have a good evening. Thank you.